Hi, there are two types of errors you might get while writing Python programs. One type of error is syntax error. So, whenever you write something syntactically wrong, what I'm going to say is if you miss a column, let us say while you are defining a function and you miss a column, or let us say you have misspelled a keyword, then they are syntax errors. So, syntax errors will stop the execution of the program and right away it will give you that there is an error. The interpreter will give you the error. And the other kind of errors are somewhat difficult for the interpreter to catch when you are compiling the program. So what I mean to say is, for example, if you are having a divide by zero error, then it will not be an error syntactically. So which means your program is syntactically right, but something you have done is not going to execute in the runtime. While running the program, if there is something wrong, then we call it as an exception. So let me summarize it. So before running the program, the errors that you get are syntax errors, and during running the program, the errors that you get are exceptions. Now there are different types of exceptions that you might get. One is syntax errors, you know that. Type error. So type error is raised whenever you are trying to add some incompatible types, some use incompatible types. For example, if you are trying to add a string with an integer, then that is a type error. And name error. So name error is going to occur whenever you are using the name of a variable which is not present in that scope. Then name error will occur. And the next one is index error. So whenever you have a list or a tuple or any sequence, and if you are going to index to a number which does not exist in that list, let us say the list size is 2 and you are trying to get a value at 3, position 3, then that is going to be an index error. And key error, whenever a key doesn't exist in a dictionary and if you are trying to access that key, then that is a key error. And value error. So value error is going to be raised when you are going to pass invalid values to a function. Okay, if a function is expecting something and if you are trying to send something else, then that will be a value error. And attribute error. So whenever you have an object, whenever you have a class and you have created an object, and if you are trying to access an attribute that does not exist in the class, then that is going to be an attribute error. And IO error, whenever we are handling files, if your file does not exist and if you are opening it for reading, then it is going to be a IO error. And similarly, divide by zero error is there, an import error. Import error occurs when we have not imported a package and we are trying to use it, then the import error is going to occur. So all these errors are not syntactic, which means if you execute the program, if you try to run the program, compiler will not be able to find it out during the compilation part, but while running the program, these errors will come out. Okay, so these are all the types of errors which are called as exceptions. Now whenever there is an exception in the program, your program will not stop gracefully, it will stop abruptly and everything will stop. And if you can handle those exceptions, your program will not actually stop. You can take some actions within the program. Whenever you expect that some line of the program is going to create a problem in the runtime, then you can actually handle the exception. So we will see how to handle the exceptions. Before that, we will take few examples and show you what are the different types of errors that we can get, how we can get it. Let's say you don't have a file existing and you are trying to open it for reading. There is no file called afile.txt, but you are opening it for reading. By default, you will open it for reading. Now, if you try to read from the file, there will be an error. There is no syntax error in this, but the problem is when you try to run it, then it is going to give you some error, and the error is file not found error. Okay, so this is one type of error that you might come across. As we are going to use files from here on, we are going to handle this. How to handle these file errors, we are going to see them. In the next few videos, we are going to use files, and in the files, we are going to see that how to handle these kind of errors. Let's see key error now. Now a dictionary is having one key value pair, and let us say we are going to access key 1. Key 1 is not present there. There is only one key called key. Now we are accessing key 1. Now if you run it, it is going to give you an error called key error. Again, in this program, syntactically it is right. There is no syntax error at all, but when you run it, you are going to see the error. So this is an exception, you have to handle it. You have to anticipate what kind of exceptions you might get in the program, and you have to handle them. Next is in a list. If you are referring to a index which does not exist, then it is going to give you index error. Index number 3 is not present, 0, 1, 2 are present. Now we are trying to access index number 3. Now that is going to give you an index error. Syntactically it is right, but when you try to run it, it is going to be an error. And next one is type error. When you try to use an operator on incompatible types, you are going to get type error. For example, there is a string called ABC, and now we are trying to add this string to an integer. Now if I run it, it is going to give me an error called type error. Syntactically it is right, but semantically it is not right. So there are a lot of other errors which you will get. I'm not showing you all the list. These are type of errors that you can get in Python or in hundreds, but they are all not required. But anyway, what the intention of this video is to tell you that there are exceptions, and next video we will try to see how to handle them. Okay. So this is the structure of the program that tries to handle exceptions. First you have to find out what are the lines in the program which might create an exception, and you try to put those lines inside the try block. So try block is going to contain all the lines which might cause an exception, and then you are going to have except. So in the except you have to write the code that has to get executed if there is an exception in the try block. So try to understand it. If there is an exception in the try block, then the code within the except block will get executed. And now if there is no exception in the try block, then you want something to be done, then you are going to place it in the else. Else have to be after except. Try should be there, then except should be there, then after except else should be there. Now else will execute when there is no exception in your program that you have written, or in the code that you have written in the try block. And then you are going to have finally. So finally will execute irrespective of whether there is an exception or not. Finally will get executed. So again, try contains the lines that might cause the exception, and except is going to get executed when there is an exception, and if there is no exception, else is going to get executed, and if irrespective of whether there is an exception or not, finally is going to get executed. Now one small thing that I want to tell you here is, coming to except, there can be multiple excepts, and each except is generally, it is a good practice to write for every error, for every exception, a different except. Okay, so if you expect that there are more than one exceptions in try, then in the except part, instead of writing one except, you write multiple excepts, and for each except you give the type of the error that you should actually handle. So there can be multiple accepts, but there is only one else and one finally. Okay. Now let's go and see, write a program and see all this. Try, accept, else, finally. Let's try to open a file that doesn't exist. Let's try to open a file in the read mode. And let's say it doesn't exist. Font size okay. So when a file doesn't exist, you are going to get file not found error. Now let's try to put it in try. Try, accept. So this line is giving us an exception. So if you guess that a line or a block of code is giving you an exception, then try to put it in try and then add an accept. So if you see, accept is giving us a green squiggly line here. The reason why it is giving us green squiggly line is because you didn't specify what type of exception you are trying to handle in this accept. It is generally a good practice to always mention what is the type of exception that you are trying to handle. Okay. So now let's try to run it. Instead of getting an error in the program, this line is going to get executed and we are going to get there was an error. So the program doesn't stop. The program will continue executing. Okay. Earlier program has stopped. Now the program is continued executing. Now let's try to open that file. If it is already not present, then we got an error. Now, as you know that it is giving us an error, let's try to open it in write mode. Therefore, a file will be created. Now you can see that a file.txt is created. You are trying to open a file that doesn't exist. That is why you are trying to say that if it doesn't exist, open the file. And now the file is open for writing. We are trying to write something onto the file. Run it and open the file. Let's now try to close it because it is already existing, right? Let's now delete it and run the code again. Now it is created a file.txt. Now open it. Something is printed in the a file.txt. So now that there is no exception here as of now, let's create one more exception. Let us say there is a dictionary with key and value as key value pair. And let's access a key that doesn't exist. Now this is going to give you an exception because key 1 doesn't exist. Now whenever there is an exception, the accept will be called, and if you observe it one more time, these lines will get executed. Now there is no error on the screen. So this is a bad practice because you are trying to handle two exceptions in the same accept. And that is why the second exception is, for the second exception you didn't do anything, it has gone without even noticing, right? So it is better to give what type of exception you want to handle in this accept. For every accept there should be only one error it should be handling. So for file not found, it is going to be the exception. Now what happened is, for the file not found, this accept is going to run, and for the key error, this exception is not handled. Now that is why you are seeing on the output that there is a key error. See that you got a key error because it is not handled. Now what you are handling is only file not found error. Now let's add one more except with key error. Now it will be handled. Now this exception will be handled in this particular except key error. Now if you see that that key doesn't exist in there, but it doesn't say which key doesn't exist. So one other advantage of using this except is you can also get the error messages, and then you can use the error message to type on the screen or type on the log. So you can also get what type of error message it is by using error message. If I write like this, accept key error as error message, then whatever the type of error message it is, we are going to get here. So now we can see that that key 1 doesn't exist. Now let's see else. So whenever there is no exception, then else will be run. Else will run. If there is no exception here, else will run. Let us say we are reading from the file in the else. We try to open the file, and if it exists, then there will be no exception. Then we are going to read the file. But the problem is there is an exception in this time here. So this else will not execute because of this exception. Try to delete that exception. Yeah, now there is no exception in the program. The file already exists. File exists, right? Check the file. Yeah, file already exists, a file.txt, and then there is no key error here. Therefore, when there is no exception in this try block, then else block will run, and else block is going to read the contents of the file and print them onto the screen. You can see that the contents of the file are printed something, right? Finally, irrespective of whether there is an exception or not, finally will run when you add finally. In finally, we are closing the file that we have opened. So whether there is an exception or not, we are going to always run finally. If there is an exception here, the file is opened here. If there is no exception, the file is opened here. Anyway, file is opened in both the cases. So whether there is an exception or not, we are going to close the file. Okay, the file was closed. So we will see exceptions in the coming programs. When we are writing the program, we are going to use try and except. So you will understand more in the form, more examples that are coming up. So don't worry if you are not able to understand this. You will be able to understand it later when we do the programs. Okay, thank you. Now that we are talking about exceptions in Python, there is a keyword called raise in Python. So which is used to raise your own exceptions. So there might not be any problem in the program, but you intentionally trying to raise an error, stop the program if something happens. Okay, for that we can use this raise. So let's take a program of calculating the BMI. So let us say you are going to read the height and weight from the user. Read it as float. Let us say height. Height should not be more than 3 meters, you know that. But if a user enters a height which is very unrealistic, like 40 meters, then we should be able to catch it, or we should be able to raise an exception. See, generally in programs we don't raise exceptions in normal cases. Here, just to show you the example I am showing you. Otherwise, you can just use a print statement also. But if I raise an exception, an error will be shown. Generally, we don't do it in our programs, but since I have to explain about raise, I am taking this program. So BMI equal to weight divided by height square. Let us run it and let's give a very high height like 40 and weight to be some 67 or something. No, weight you give it as normal weight. Now you can see that BMI is calculated without any problem, but the problem is in meters the height is given as 30, which is actually not right. The height has to be less than 4 meters, but it is actually for 30. So what we can do is we can raise an exception in this case. You can also do it with a print statement, but just to explain you about raise, I am talking about it. So if height is greater than 4, then we are going to raise an exception. So what type of exception you want to raise here? It is a value error. The value given is not right, and you can also give a message. That message will be shown in the screen. Height should not be over 4 meters. Now if you run the program, height is 30, weight is 76, and you can see that you got an error, right? And the error is value error. So we have raised an exception here, and it is saying that human height should not be over 4 meters. Okay, thank you.